Monster Hunter World is an unusual game. It's unique, fun, and I don't regret the 190 hours I put into the game at time of writing. Yet at the same time, it's a game I find hard to recommend, and I'm not sure if I'll jump into any sequels without major improvements. See, Monster Hunter is a series that seems to have been steadily growing in popularity over the years. Monster Hunter World is arguably the game where the hype hit critical mass and the game went mainstream. I say mainstream in the sense that most of my friends are playing it, and it seems to pop up a lot, as opposed to being limited to one or two nutters out there in internet land. While I've not looked up many opinions about the game, I get the impression that the game is kind of like Dark Souls in that the game has problems, and people admit to those problems, but criticising the game because of them is verboten. As such, this review is likely going to come across as very negative, despite me enjoying my time with the game and being conflicted about it overall. There is a story to the game, but for the most part it's an excuse plot to justify you hunting monsters. While the plot itself isn't very good, it can at least be good at setting the mood and tone when required. Large battles feel suitably epic, and the ending is satisfying even if the core mystery is kinda bleh. The story's biggest flaw is that you play as a silent protagonist, not a problem on its own. The problem is that no one seems to have told the writing team, leading to strange and unintentionally funny moments where everybody is acting like you said something despite you standing there in total silence.
I've gotta stop it! Alright.
The general gist of the gameplay is that you kill or capture giant monsters, which rewards you with monster-specific materials that can be turned into better gear, allowing you to kill tougher monsters. That's ultimately what the game's about, and it's satisfying when you get both the gear and the personal skill to casually beat a monster that put you through hell initially. There's also a wide variety of weapons, and I don't mean the usual tweaking of damage and speed values. I mean that each one is radically different in terms of moves, combos, mechanics, strengths and weaknesses. There are fast and agile knives to large shields for slow defensive playstyles, and even bows and guns that turn the game into a third-person shooter, albeit not a great one. For example, the knives allow you to go into an aggressive mode called Demon Mode that drains your stamina. You can build charge in this mode that allows you to be in a lesser form of Demon Mode that doesn't cost stamina. This simple mechanic actually has a lot of nuance to it. Do I fight in normal mode and wait until there's an opening before I activate Demon Mode and go in for massive damage? Or do I switch in and out of Demon Mode as needed to try and keep my lesser Demon Mode charged? Or maybe I go all in all the time for massive DPS with carefully timed bits of stamina recovery. In contrast, the Charge Blade is a sword and shield that can transform into a giant axe. The sword gains charge from hitting enemies that you can then store in the shield with a sort of reload animation. This charge can then be spent to do extra damage in axe form. There's a lot of subtle nuance to each weapon, so much so that I was still figuring out little tricks and new types of moves more than 100 hours in, such as running up certain walls with the knives or powering up the Charge Blade shield so that it causes an explosion whenever an enemy hits it. Some mechanics are strange and confusing, but make sense eventually. I'll get into the downside of this later, but for now, there's standard stuff like healing potions, as well as some weirder stuff, like needing to sharpen melee weapons using a whetstone. Yes, even hammers need sharpening. You can wear cloaks called mantles, which grant special abilities, but you have to manually take them off in order to start the cooldown. These sound obvious when I'm telling them to you like this, but some of this is not obvious initially. Then there's the monsters themselves, well designed and unique for the most part. There are some shared animations and even a few reskins and colour swaps, but most of the monsters are unique enough that you'll end up on a first name basis with most of them. If I say I was going to hunt a Pookie Pookie, then people who've played the game will likely know to bring poison resistance. The animations and AI are fantastic, most of the time. They move and behave in ways that seem realistic. They will limp away when injured, try and use their natural abilities against you, and they will charge or use range attacks from afar, stomp you if you get underneath them, or use their tail if you try and run around them. You can also break certain parts to reduce their effectiveness, so a broken head might make the fire breath misfire occasionally, or a severed tail might reduce the range of a tail whip, etc. As a result of this, the monster fights can be lengthy, involved and intense affairs, when it all works. See, the game has many glaring flaws, though I think it says a lot about the game that some of these things are normally deal breakers for me, but here I reluctantly put up with them. For example, stun locks are normally an instant deal breaker for me, and this game has tons of them. Most monsters have at least two. Roaring, which locks you in place while your character covers his ears, and stun, which allegedly is caused by taking 3 hits in rapid succession, but I'll get to that later. Other monsters can cause tremors, which lock you in place as your character stumbles around. There's paralysis, which is fairly self-explanatory, and wind pressure from being near flapping wings. Add in attacks that can land the instant your character gets up, and you can likely already see how you can go from full health to dead in one unavoidable combo. So, for sake of argument, it might be a roar setting you up for a string of hits, which leaves you stunned, allowing the monster to deal a killing blow. Luckily, I'm told by Monster Hunter fans that stun locks do not exist in this game. This game, like many Japanese games, has a problem with tutorials. The game over-explains basic things like walking around and hitting things as if you never played a game before, but doesn't explain important features like how specific weapons work. Well, okay, it does explain how the weapons work, but it's buried deep within menus. I was something like 50 hours into the game when I found out there's a weapon tutorial tab. It's ridiculous. Other things are just poorly explained. Investigations are kill X with Y condition for Z reward type quests, mainly used for grinding. The game points out that investigations are limited, and once attempted a certain number of times, they can never be done again. This is technically correct for individual investigations, but you get a never-ending stream of them just for playing the game normally. It would be like me saying that every random battle in a JRPG is unique and can never be repeated because the specific combinations of mobs and items that they drop are different every time. This poor explanation of basic mechanics is defended by fans as keeping the mystery in the game. And it's not a game that holds your hand. But if that's true, why does the game over-explain basic things early on? This poor explanation and needlessly opaque mechanics can lead to arguments between players. This also raised some red flags in my head when people started contradicting their own explanations. Are all weapon types equally effective against all monsters, or are some better suited to some monsters than others? You can't have it both ways. This is not helped by the game seeming to change the rules whenever it feels like it. I mentioned stun before. As said, I'm told this was caused by taking 3 hits in rapid succession, but there are times when I was stunned even when it felt like a long time between hits. I even heard people complain they were stunned after being hit once by certain monsters. No one seems to have a concrete answer about how it works outside of speculation, how they think it works. You can point to wikis and forum posts, but those are often just speculation as well. One monster drops exploding scales that, well, explode, and they have a chance to set you on fire. Are these considered explosives, fire, or both? Hitboxes are also inconsistent. Sometimes it's accurate enough to let you roll under a monster's swipe and stab it in some specific weak point. Other times hitboxes seem random or even nonsensical. I was standing to the side of one monster when it leapt away from me, and yet I still got hit. Another monster can send out a shockwave of poison gas that somehow sucks you towards the monster if it hits. Some monsters can hurt you or even knock you on your arse simply by running when you're near them. This would make sense if the monster was charging at you or was trying to stomp on you, but no, it's running while it's near you that causes it. When using the dual knives, you can slide down hills to do special attacks, but what's considered a hill are not as vague and inconsistent. It's as if the hills are defined by a level designer, but there was no common baseline for what is and isn't a hill. When you're using the knives, you also have a wall run move by pressing B, but the game doesn't tell you how to do this, and it only seems to work on specific walls. You could grab onto monsters' backs if you jump onto them, allowing you to climb around and stab specific body parts, while gripping tight or moving to different parts to avoid its attempts to shake you off. Some even going so far as to headbutt walls to get you off their face. It's great fun when it happens, but grabbing onto a monster is inconsistent to the point of almost being random. Even the explanation that there's a cooldown on the monster itself for how often it can be grabbed doesn't really explain it. Another inconsistency is more of a nitpick, but it goes to show how scattershot the game can be, and that's that the menus are inconsistent and fiddly. In the pause menu, the crafting list is at the top and the item pouch is below it. Okay, fine. But in the equipment box menu, the item pouch is at the top and the crafting list is below that. And in the tent, it's switched around again. You could change your equipment and items at the item box, in the tent, or at the blacksmith, but you can only change your cat's equipment in the private room or the tent. Now, if you tilt your head and squint, you might be able to make sense of it. BS, you're rarely in a rush to craft things, but if you need to craft things in the field, you're likely in a hurry, so the less presses the better. So putting crafting first can save one input, I guess? But why switch it around at base if that's the case? Why are monster notes, which tell you things like item drop rates and elemental weaknesses, buried deep in the menus even though it's something you frequently check before a hunt? The menus in general are a pain. Menus within menus, tabs within tabs, it's a mess. As mentioned earlier, I didn't know there was a detailed weapons tutorial buried in the menu somewhere until an embarrassing amount of hours into the game. While we're on the subject of menus, let's talk about item management. Why do you have to keep faffing around putting items in and out of the box? You could save loadouts, which is handy, but that doesn't really explain why you have to faff around with items like this to begin with. For a great example of what I mean, let's look at flash pods. You can only carry 3 flash pods, but you could carry a stack of materials to make 10 flash pods. Why not just let me carry 13 flash pods? There's no kind of animation attached to crafting, and even if there was, it would be trivial to run somewhere safe to refill. You can also fly back to camp if you want to restock items too, making that 3 flash pod limit even more redundant. The only time this really makes sense is with healing items, traps and barrel bombs. That way the player can't spam healing, keep monsters stun locked with traps, or can't do practically infinite damage in one hit by stacking infinite bombs on top of each other. Carry limits aren't the only pointless mechanic in the game. There are many others. Early on you'll unlock a farm that allows you to grow plants, mushrooms and insects for crafting, usually consumables. There are many types of fertilizer that increase your yields, but basically it comes down to one for each type plus a generic one that makes things grow faster. But it's a largely pointless system as fertilizer is cheap. There's no strategy here, it's just busy work. Some ingredients are used to craft one item at a rate of 1:1. Herbs are only used to make healing potions and nothing else as far as I can tell. Why even have herbs in the game at all then? Yeah, it's not realistic to pick potions off the vine, but the game automatically converts herbs into potions if you have the inventory space anywhere, so why not just have them always be potions? You can make poisoned meat and trick monsters into eating it. This never once worked for me whenever I tried it. It wasn't until they added the new monster as free DLC that it was actually useful. It apparently works on Great Jagras, the first monster in the game, but Jagras is a pushover even without tainted meat, and you've likely already beaten him by the time you have the materials to make it anyway. Again, I want to stress that the game isn't all bad. As I said at the start, I don't regret my time with it, and it was a unique experience. When it all works, it's a great game, either alone or with friends. There's a bunch of likeable things I haven't mentioned, like the music or your little cat sidekick that's both adorable and useful. There's a lot of fun animations, such as the chef cooking animations or the tail rider safari deployment animation. But it's dragged down by a lot of problems. Some are nitpicks like the menus, but some stuff is indefensible, like the way co-op works. For side content it's fine, but the story missions have the stupidest system for co-op I've ever seen. You can't join someone else's story mission until they've seen all the cutscenes for that level, and because the cutscenes often include a large monster introduction, that means co-op only becomes available during a fight. Can you imagine if any other game did this? Imagine if in Left 4 Dead you couldn't invite someone to your game until you were under attack by a horde. Or imagine playing Dead Island, but the game booted out everybody whenever you try to do a story mission. There are various workarounds like loading the quest, watching the cutscenes, quitting the quest, and then restarting the quest in multiplayer, but that doesn't excuse it. This was made worse by the previously mentioned menus and the fact the game was plagued with connection problems on release, though to be fair those connection issues have been fixed. But then of course there's the bunch of small annoyances and pet peeves of mine that begin to mount up. I've mentioned a lot of them already, but I'll quickly go through some more. Like the way you're expected to grind low level monsters even when you're in the late game. It makes collecting full gear sets a chore. Before a hunt, you can eat a meal for various buffs, but once you get in the field, you'll want to drink your arm skin potion for extra defense, your devil drug for an attack boost, eat your max potion to extend your health bar, and maybe drink a cool drink if you're in a location with a hot zone. Each animation taking a few seconds to play out, and said items can be easily replaced by going back into the tent. It's all busy work and should come as standard with a pre-hunt meal. Sometimes items land on top of each other, meaning you can't do the thing you want because your character's obsessed with swapping out two useless ammo pickups. Some kind of tap to do X, hold to do Y system would work wonders here. NPCs and vendors always want to talk to you before they allow you to do what you want to do, repeating the same 3 or 4 stock non-conversations each time. So you tap through the speech every single time, which is a minor annoyance on its own. But this is made worse by the way they will sometimes say something useful or relevant to the plot, and you're likely to skip through most of that conversation by accident. Or at least I did more than once. I could go on, but I'm sure you get the point. The game has many flaws, big and small, that you're fighting against through the whole game. It's a shame too, as like I said, there's a lot to like here. It's a game that's fun when it works, and it's certainly memorable. Hell, I even made some new friends because of it. And as said at the start, I don't regret my time playing it. That said, I won't be buying a sequel unless there's huge improvements made to the game.
He could be captured. Come here. Stop flipping away.
He's running.
No, don't crawl in there.
Oh, why have I paralysed? Oh, the kitties have...
Because of kitties.
The abos. Oh, they got me too.